The moment you tell someone your goal, you've already started failing. That's not motivation talk. That's psychology. Every time you share what you're planning to do, your brain tricks you into thinking you've already done it. You get a hit of satisfaction from their reaction, their encouragement, their validation. And that hit, it kills your drive to actually do the work. Most people spend more time talking about their goals than working on them. They announce their plans, get a few likes, feel accomplished, and then wonder why they never follow through. Today, we're breaking that cycle. You're going to learn why silence is your strongest weapon and why the people who change their lives are the ones who work in the dark. Chapter 1. Your brain thinks talking equals doing. Your brain can't tell the difference between talking about doing something and actually doing it. That's the fundamental problem most people never understand. When you tell someone about your goal, your mind releases the same feel-good chemicals it would if you had actually made progress. It's called social reality. The moment you speak your intention out loud and get positive feedback, your brain marks it as partially complete. You've satisfied the psychological need for recognition without doing any real work. This isn't just theory. There are decades of research showing that people who announce their goals are significantly less likely to achieve them than those who keep them private. When you tell someone you're going to lose weight, start a business, write a book, or change your life in any way, you're borrowing satisfaction from your future success. You're spending motivation you haven't earned yet. And once you've spent it, it's gone. Think about how many times you've seen someone post about their new fitness journey, new business idea, or life change. They get dozens of supportive comments, hearts, encouragement. They feel amazing. They feel like they're already on the path. But then what happens? Most of the time, nothing. The posting stops. The updates disappear. The goal quietly dies because they already got what they were really looking for. Attention, validation, the feeling of being seen as someone who has their life together. Your brain is wired to seek social approval. It's how humans survived for thousands of years. Being accepted by the tribe meant survival. Being rejected meant death. So, when you share a goal and people respond positively, your brain floods with dopamine. You feel connected. You feel supported. You feel like you belong. But that same mechanism that kept your ancestors alive is now sabotaging your success. Because once you get that approval, the urgency to actually achieve the goal decreases dramatically. The problem compounds when people start giving you advice. Suddenly, everyone has an opinion about how you should approach your goal. They share their own experiences, their failures, their concerns. They mean well, but they're filling your head with noise. They're giving you reasons to doubt, reasons to delay, reasons to modify your approach before you've even started. What started as a clear vision becomes clouded with other people's projections, fears, and limitations. This is why successful people move differently. They don't announce. They execute. They don't seek permission. They take action. They understand that talking about goals is a form of procrastination disguised as progress. It feels productive, but it's not. It's mental masturbation. It's avoiding the real work by creating the illusion that sharing equals caring, that intention equals action, that planning equals doing. When you keep your goals private, something powerful happens. All that energy you would have spent explaining, defending and discussing gets redirected into actual work. You stop performing and start producing. You stop seeking validation for your plans and start building evidence through your actions. Your motivation comes from progress, not praise. Your satisfaction comes from results, not reactions. The most dangerous part about sharing goals is that it creates external pressure in all the wrong ways. People start asking about your progress. They want updates. They're watching to see if you'll actually follow through. This creates performance anxiety instead of performance drive. You start worrying about what they'll think if you fail instead of focusing on what you need to do to succeed. You become more concerned with managing their expectations than exceeding your own. Chapter 2. Validation kills your drive to actually work. Validation is a drug, and like any drug, it gives you a temporary high followed by a crash that leaves you weaker than before. When you share your goals and receive positive feedback, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter involved in addiction. You feel good, accomplished, motivated. But here's the cruel irony. That feeling of accomplishment makes you less likely to put in the actual work needed to achieve the goal. This happens because validation satisfies your psychological need for recognition and status without requiring any real effort or sacrifice. Your brain essentially thinks mission accomplished. We got the respect and attention we were seeking. The social reward circuit in your brain has been activated, reducing your motivation to seek the actual achievement reward. It's like eating dessert before dinner and then wondering why you're not hungry for the main course. Most people don't realize they're addicted to this validation cycle. They've trained themselves to seek micro hits of approval throughout their journey instead of focusing on the macro result at the end. They share every small step, every minor insight, every tiny piece of progress because they're chasing the next fix. But each time they do this, they're weakening their internal drive. They're becoming dependent on external fuel instead of building their own engine. The validation trap is especially dangerous because it feels so positive. People genuinely want to support you. They offer encouragement, advice, resources. It all seems helpful, but what's really happening is that you're outsourcing your motivation to other people. You're making your persistence dependent on their continued interest and support. And here's the problem. Other people have their own lives, their own problems, their own goals. Their attention will fade. Their support will waver, and when it does, if you haven't built internal drive, you'll crash. Think about the people you know who are constantly starting new projects, new diets, new business ideas. They announce each one with enthusiasm. They get initial support, but then they quietly abandon them when the novelty wears off and the real work begins. They're not weak or lazy. They're validation addicts. They've trained their brains to associate goal setting with social reward rather than personal achievement. The strongest people you know probably don't talk much about what they're working on. They're too busy working on it. They understand that every minute spent explaining their plan is a minute not spent executing it. They've learned that the energy required to convince others could be better used to convince themselves through action. They don't need external validation because they're building internal validation through consistent progress. When you chase validation, you also start to modify your goals based on other people's reactions. If someone seems skeptical, you might lower your standards to seem more realistic. If someone suggests a different approach, you might abandon your original plan even though it was working. You become a leaf in the wind, blown around by every opinion and reaction. Instead of staying rooted in your own vision and commitment, validation seeking also creates a false sense of accountability. You think that by telling people your goals, you're creating pressure to follow through. But social accountability only works if there are real consequences for failure. In most cases, people will just offer sympathy if you don't succeed. They'll say, "It's okay, you tried." Or, "Maybe it wasn't meant to be." They'll help you rationalize your failure instead of holding you to your standard. Real accountability comes from within, from the commitment you make to yourself. When no one else is watching, the validation trap keeps you focused on the wrong metrics. Instead of measuring progress toward your actual goal, you start measuring social engagement. How many people liked your post about your new workout routine becomes more important than how many workouts you actually completed. How many people congratulated you on your business idea becomes more important than how much revenue you generated. You're optimizing for reactions instead of results. Breaking free from validation addiction requires a fundamental shift in how you think about success. You have to learn to find satisfaction in the work itself, not in other people's opinions about the work. You have to build the discipline to celebrate privately and suffer privately. You have to become comfortable with being misunderstood, unsupported and unnoticed during the building phase, because the building phase is where the real work happens and the real work doesn't need an audience. Chapter 3. Silent execution creates real power. There's a different kind of power that comes from working in silence. It's not the flashy, performative power that seeks attention. It's the quiet, unshakable power that comes from knowing you can create results without needing anyone to witness the process. When you execute silently, you develop an internal strength that can't be bought, borrowed, or broken. You become someone who doesn't need external validation to stay motivated, external pressure to stay disciplined, or external recognition to feel accomplished. Silent execution forces you to develop genuine self-reliance. When no one knows what you're working on, you can't rely on their encouragement to keep you going. You can't use their expectations as motivation. You can't lean on their support when things get difficult. You have to build your own engine, create your own fuel, and maintain your own momentum. This builds a psychological resilience that serves you far beyond any single goal. When you work in silence, you also work with complete honesty. There's no need to exaggerate your progress, minimize your struggles, or present a curated version of your journey. You can face the reality of where you are without worrying about how it looks to others. This honesty allows you to make better decisions, adjust more quickly, and stay connected to what's actually working versus what you think should be working. Silent execution also protects your goals from other people's limitations. When you keep your plans private, they can't be contaminated by other people's fears, doubts, or past failures. You don't have to hear about how someone tried something similar and it didn't work. You don't have to field questions about whether you're being realistic or suggestions about easier alternatives. Your vision stays pure, unfiltered by the noise of others' opinions and experiences. The power of silent execution is amplified by the element of surprise. When you've been working quietly and then emerge with results, people are forced to take you seriously in a way they never would if they had been watching the messy process. They see the finished product, not the daily grind. They witness the transformation, not the struggle. This creates a different kind of respect, a deeper kind of recognition that's based on achievement rather than intention. Working silently also allows you to move at your own pace without external pressure. You don't have to provide updates on a timeline that suits others. You don't have to defend slow periods or explain setbacks. You can take the time you need to do things right without worrying about maintaining momentum in other people's minds. This freedom to move authentically at your natural rhythm often leads to better long-term results. Silent execution builds confidence in a unique way. When you achieve something without external support or recognition, you know that you're capable of creating results independently. You're not dependent on circumstances, other people's moods, or external conditions. You've proven to yourself that you can execute regardless of who's watching, who's supporting, or who believes in you. This self-knowledge becomes an unshakable foundation for future challenges. The discipline required for silent execution also spills over into other areas of your life. When you learn to work consistently without external accountability, you develop an internal standard that applies to everything you do. You become someone who finishes what they start not because others are watching but because completion is part of your identity. You become reliable to yourself, which is the most important kind of reliability there is. Silent execution also eliminates the energy drain that comes from managing other people's reactions to your goals. You don't have to spend mental energy explaining your choices, defending your timeline, or updating people on your progress. All of that energy gets redirected into the actual work. You become more efficient, more focused, and more productive because your energy isn't scattered across multiple social obligations related to your goal. When you master silent execution, you develop what could be called quiet confidence. It's not the loud, boastful confidence that needs constant reinforcement. It's the calm certainty that comes from knowing you can create results without fanfare. You don't need to announce your capabilities because you've proven them to yourself. You don't need to convince others of your potential because you're too busy actualizing it. The ultimate power of silent execution is that it makes your success inevitable rather than impressive. When you're not working for applause, you're working for achievement. When you're not seeking recognition, you're seeking results. And results, unlike recognition, compound over time. Each silent victory builds on the last, creating momentum that doesn't depend on external factors. You become unstoppable not because you're talented or lucky, but because you've learned to generate your own motivation, maintain your own discipline, and create your own success regardless of who's watching. Chapter 4. Most people are waiting for you to fail anyway. This is a hard truth that most people don't want to face. A significant portion of the people you tell your goals to are secretly hoping you won't achieve them. Not necessarily because they're evil or malicious, but because your success makes them uncomfortable with their own lack of action. Your progress highlights their stagnation. Your discipline exposes their excuses. Your commitment reveals their inconsistency. So, subconsciously, many people have a vested interest in seeing you stay where you are. Human psychology is complicated. While people might consciously want to support you, unconsciously they often prefer that you remain at their level or below. Your success can feel like a judgment on their choices, even when that's not your intention. If you succeed at losing weight, it highlights that they could too if they had your discipline. If you build a successful business, it suggests they could too if they had your persistence. Your achievement becomes a mirror that reflects their own unfulfilled potential. And most people don't like what they see. This psychological dynamic creates a subtle but powerful form of sabotage. People might not actively try to stop you, but they'll offer just enough discouragement to slow you down. They'll point out the risks, remind you of past failures, question your timeline, or suggest that you're being unrealistic. They'll do this under the guise of being helpful, protective, or realistic. But what they're really doing is trying to pull you back into their comfort zone where everyone is equally stuck. The people closest to you are often the worst offenders. Family members, longtime friends, and colleagues have a mental image of who you are, and your dramatic change threatens that image. They've built an identity around their relationship with the old you, and they're not necessarily eager to let that person go. Change is threatening to people who aren't changing. Growth is uncomfortable for people who aren't growing. Your evolution forces them to confront their own stagnation. When you announce your goals, you also invite people to become critics rather than supporters. Everyone suddenly becomes an expert on what you should or shouldn't do. They start pointing out potential problems, sharing stories of people who failed at similar goals, or questioning whether you have what it takes. This criticism, even when well-intentioned, plants seeds of doubt that can derail your progress before you even start. The waiting for failure dynamic is especially strong on social media. People might double-tap your announcement post, but they're also secretly watching to see if you'll actually follow through. There's a perverse entertainment value in watching people fail at their grand proclamations. It makes observers feel better about their own lack of ambition. Your failure validates their decision to play it safe, to not set big goals, to avoid the risk of public disappointment. This doesn't mean everyone in your life is against you. There are genuine supporters who want to see you succeed. But the reality is that you can't tell the difference between real supporters and secret saboteurs based on their initial reactions. People who seem encouraging might undermine you later when your progress makes them uncomfortable. People who seem skeptical might become your biggest champions once you prove yourself. The only way to avoid this dynamic entirely is to not participate in it. When you work silently, you protect yourself from this negative energy. You don't give people the opportunity to project their limitations onto your goals. You don't invite their criticism, their doubts, or their subtle discouragement. You don't become a source of entertainment for people who are secretly hoping you'll fail so they can feel better about their own inaction. The waiting for failure mentality also manifests in how people react when you do encounter setbacks. If you've announced your goals publicly and then hit a rough patch, people are quick to suggest that maybe you should give up, lower your standards, or try something easier. They frame this as caring advice, but it's often projection. They're telling you what they would do in your situation, which is quit. They're trying to normalize failure because it makes them feel better about their own abandoned goals. Silent execution protects you from this energy drain. When you encounter obstacles, you don't have to manage other people's reactions to your struggles. You don't have to defend your decision to keep going when things get tough. You don't have to resist the pull of well-meaning people who are trying to convince you to settle for less. You can focus all your energy on problem solving instead of people managing. Understanding that most people are waiting for you to fail isn't meant to make you cynical or paranoid. It's meant to make you realistic about human nature and strategic about how you pursue your goals. People aren't necessarily bad for feeling this way. It's a natural psychological response to someone else's ambition when they're not pursuing their own. But knowing this dynamic exists helps you make better decisions about who you share your goals with and when. The most powerful position you can be in is when people discover your success after the fact. When they realize you've been working on something significant without their knowledge and have achieved real results. This forces them to respect your capability instead of questioning your potential. It positions you as someone who executes rather than someone who announces. And that reputation for quiet competence becomes one of your greatest assets. Chapter 5. Your energy gets scattered when you explain instead of execute. Every minute you spend explaining your goals is a minute you're not working on them. Every conversation about what you plan to do is energy that could be directed toward actually doing it. Most people don't realize how much mental bandwidth they waste on goal-related communication. They talk about their plans, defend their choices, update people on their progress, and manage reactions to their journey. All of this communication requires energy, attention, and emotional labor that could be better invested in execution. Explanation is a form of energy leak that most people never identify. When you tell someone about your goal, you don't just share information and move on. You engage in a complex social interaction that requires you to read their reaction, respond to their questions, address their concerns, and manage their expectations. You might spend 10 minutes talking about a goal and then need 30 minutes to mentally process the conversation, deal with any doubt they planted, and refocus on your actual plan. The explaining habit also creates decision fatigue around your goals. When you constantly talk about what you're doing, you're forced to articulate and re-articulate your reasoning. You have to defend your choices repeatedly, which makes you question them unnecessarily. You start second-guessing decisions that were working simply because you've had to explain them so many times. The more you explain, the more you doubt. The more you doubt, the less you execute. Scattered energy also comes from trying to maintain consistency across multiple conversations about your goals. If you've told 10 different people about your fitness plan, you now have to remember what you told each person and keep your story straight. You have to maintain the same level of enthusiasm across multiple interactions. Even when your natural energy fluctuates, you become a performer of your own goal rather than a pursuer of it. When you explain your goals repeatedly, you also start to modify them based on the feedback you receive. Someone suggests a different approach, so you consider changing your method. Someone questions your timeline, so you extend your deadline. Someone shares a horror story about someone who failed at something similar, so you add unnecessary precautions. Your clear, simple goal becomes complicated and watered down through the process of explanation and feedback incorporation. The energy required to manage other people's reactions to your goals is enormous and often unrecognized. Some people will be overly enthusiastic, which creates pressure to match their energy level even when you're not feeling it. Others will be skeptical, which requires you to defend your choice and manage your own doubt. Still, others will be indifferent, which can be demoralizing and make you question whether your goal matters. All of these reactions require emotional labor to process and respond to appropriately. Execution, on the other hand, is a form of energy multiplication. When you direct all your mental and emotional resources toward actual work, you enter flow states more easily. You build momentum more quickly. You see progress more clearly. You don't waste energy on social management, expectation setting, or doubt processing. Everything goes into forward motion, which creates a compound effect that talking about goals can never match. Silent execution also protects your goals from the energy drain of constant justification. When no one knows what you're working on, you don't have to explain why you're doing it, how you're doing it, or when you expect to be done. You don't have to convince anyone that your approach is sound or your timeline is realistic. You can focus entirely on the work itself, which is where real progress happens. The scattered energy problem becomes especially acute when you're working on multiple goals. If you're announcing and updating people on several different projects, you're now managing multiple streams of social interaction around your personal development. You become a social media manager for your own life, spending more time communicating about growth than actually growing. Another hidden energy drain comes from the emotional labor of managing disappointment when things don't go as announced. If you've told people you're going to achieve something by a certain date and you don't meet that deadline, you now have to deal with their reactions as well as your own disappointment. You have to explain what went wrong, adjust their expectations, and manage their potentially decreased confidence in your ability to follow through. This emotional overhead can be devastating to your motivation. When you keep your goals private, all of this energy gets redirected into pure execution. You wake up and work on your goal instead of waking up and thinking about who you need to update about your goal. You encounter obstacles and immediately shift into problem-solving mode. Instead of spending time figuring out how to communicate the setback to others, you make progress and feel the intrinsic satisfaction of advancement instead of diluting that satisfaction by sharing it with others. The focus that comes from silent execution is like the difference between a laser and a light bulb. A light bulb spreads its energy in all directions, illuminating a wide area but without much intensity. A laser concentrates all its energy in one direction, creating enough power to cut through solid materials. When you explain instead of execute, you're being a light bulb. When you execute silently, you become a laser. The most successful people understand this energy management principle intuitively. They don't waste time on goal-related communication. They don't seek input on their plans from people who aren't qualified to give it. They don't provide updates to people who aren't invested in their success. They conserve their energy for the work itself, which is why they consistently outperform people who are more talented but less focused. Chapter 6. Real accountability doesn't come from announcements. Most people confuse announcement with accountability, but they're completely different mechanisms with opposite effects. Real accountability is about consequences, commitment, and character. It's about creating systems that make it harder to quit than to continue. It's about building structures that pull you forward when motivation fades. Announcements, on the other hand, are about attention, validation, and social positioning. They feel like accountability because they involve other people, but they actually undermine your ability to stay committed. True accountability starts with self-accountability. It's the commitment you make to yourself when no one else is around. It's the promise you keep to your future self when your current self doesn't feel like keeping it. It's the standard you maintain when there's no external pressure to do so. This internal accountability is developed through small consistent actions that prove to yourself that you can be trusted. Every time you do what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it, you're building accountability muscle. Real accountability systems are practical, not social. They involve structure, measurement, and consequences that are directly tied to your performance. Maybe it's tracking your daily actions in a private journal. Maybe it's setting up financial stakes where you lose money if you don't follow through. Maybe it's creating environmental constraints that make your goal behavior easier and your default behavior harder. These systems work because they change your actual circumstances, not just your social obligations. The problem with social accountability through announcements is that it's based on other people's reactions rather than your own commitment. You're essentially outsourcing your willpower to people who have their own lives, problems, and priorities. They might care about your success initially, but their attention will fade. Their support will become sporadic. Their follow-up questions will stop. And when that external pressure disappears, if you haven't built internal accountability, you'll collapse. Social accountability also creates the wrong kind of pressure. When you announce your goals, you're asking people to become monitors of your progress. This turns your relationships into performance evaluations. Instead of interacting with people naturally, you're constantly aware that they're watching to see if you're living up to your announcements. This creates anxiety and resentment that can damage relationships and make you associate your goals with negative emotions. Real accountability is also about having skin in the game in ways that matter to you personally. This might mean signing up for an event that requires you to be ready by a certain date. It might mean investing money in equipment or coaching that you'll lose if you don't follow through. It might mean making commitments to yourself that have real consequences if broken. The key is that these consequences are personal and immediate, not social and theoretical. Professional accountability, when done right, can be powerful because it's based on expertise rather than friendship. A qualified coach, trainer, or mentor can provide accountability that's informed by experience and focused on results rather than feelings. They can hold you to standards you might not hold yourself to while providing guidance on how to meet those standards. But this kind of accountability is private, professional, and performance-based, not social and announcement-based. The accountability that comes from announcing goals is often superficial and temporary. People might ask about your progress for a few weeks, but they'll quickly lose interest if you're not providing entertaining updates. They'll stop following up if your journey becomes boring or routine. And they'll often accept your excuses too readily because they don't want to be seen as harsh or unsupportive. This kind of accountability has no teeth, no consequences, and no staying power. Real accountability also involves tracking the right metrics. When you announce goals publicly, you often end up tracking social metrics like engagement, comments, and reactions rather than performance metrics like actual progress toward your goal. You start optimizing for likes rather than results, for social validation rather than personal achievement. This misdirection can derail your progress without you even realizing it's happening. Effective accountability systems also build in flexibility for the inevitable obstacles and setbacks that occur in any meaningful pursuit. They account for the fact that progress isn't linear and that methods might need to be adjusted along the way. Social accountability through announcements doesn't allow for this flexibility because you've committed to a specific narrative in public. Any deviation from your announced plan feels like failure. Even when it might be strategic adaptation, the most powerful form of accountability is identity-based rather than outcome-based. Instead of announcing that you're going to lose 30 pounds, you privately commit to becoming the kind of person who takes care of their body. Instead of declaring that you're going to build $1 million business, you focus on becoming the kind of person who creates value for others. This identity-based approach creates internal accountability that doesn't depend on external validation or monitoring. Real accountability also involves understanding your personal patterns of self-sabotage and building systems specifically designed to counteract them. If you tend to quit when things get boring, you build variety into your approach. If you tend to give up when you hit obstacles, you pre-plan how you'll handle common setbacks. If you tend to lose motivation when progress slows, you create milestone celebrations that aren't dependent on other people's recognition. The accountability that matters most happens in the private moments when you have a choice between doing what you committed to do and doing what you feel like doing. These moments happen daily, sometimes hourly. They're not dramatic or noteworthy enough to share on social media, but they're where real character is built and real progress is made. The accumulation of these small private victories creates unstoppable momentum that no amount of social accountability can match. Ultimately, Real accountability is about becoming someone who doesn't need external pressure to do the right thing. It's about developing internal standards that are higher than what others would expect from you. It's about creating personal integrity that doesn't fluctuate based on who's watching or who cares. When you build this kind of accountability, you become unstoppable because your motivation comes from within. Your standards don't depend on others and your progress doesn't require an audience. Chapter 7. Success looks different when no one saw it coming. There's a unique power that comes from success that emerges without fanfare, without build-up, without a documented journey. When you achieve something significant that no one saw coming, it creates a different kind of impact than success that was announced, tracked, and celebrated along the way. It forces people to recalibrate their understanding of who you are and what you're capable of. It eliminates their ability to dismiss your achievement as lucky, temporary, or overhyped because they can't point to any hype that preceded it. Unexpected success carries more weight because it's based purely on results rather than narrative. When people have been watching your journey, they've already formed opinions about your chances, your methods, and your likely outcomes. They've watched you struggle, seen your setbacks, and perhaps mentally categorized you as someone who's trying but probably won't make it. This preformed judgment can diminish the impact of your eventual success because it fits into a story they've already written in their minds. But when success appears suddenly without context or buildup, it can't be dismissed or minimized. People have to confront the reality that you've achieved something significant while they weren't paying attention. They can't explain it away as the result of circumstances they were aware of. They can't point to advantages they observed or preparation they witnessed. Your success becomes undeniable because it stands alone without the ability to be deconstructed or rationalized away. This kind of success also protects you from the politics and jealousy that often accompany visible achievement. When people watch your entire journey, they have time to develop resentment, to find reasons why your success is unfair or undeserved. They can point to help you received, lucky breaks you caught, or advantages you had. But when success appears without a visible journey, these criticisms lose their foundation. People are forced to acknowledge your capability rather than analyzing your circumstances. Unexpected success also demonstrates a level of discipline and focus that announced success never can. Anyone can work hard when people are watching and cheering them on. But working consistently when no one knows or cares requires a different level of commitment. It shows that your motivation is internal rather than external. That your standards are self-imposed rather than socially driven. This creates a reputation for quiet competence that's far more valuable than a reputation for loud effort. The element of surprise in success also creates what psychologists call the amplification effect. When something unexpected happens, it has a greater impact on people's perceptions than something they saw coming. An announced success might be impressive, but an unexpected success is memorable. It sticks in people's minds and changes how they think about you in a more fundamental way. You become someone who can't be easily categorized or predict. Working towards success in private also allows you to develop your own relationship with the process without external influence. You learn what motivates you, what strategies work for you, and what pace suits you without having to consider other people's opinions or expectations. This self-knowledge becomes invaluable for future goals because you've learned to trust your own instincts rather than relying on external feedback and validation. Unexpected success also gives you more control over the narrative. When it's time to share your achievement instead of having your story told in real time by people who were watching your journey, you get to present the complete polished result on your own terms. You can share what you want to share, emphasize what you want to emphasize, and maintain privacy around the aspects of your journey that you prefer to keep personal. The respect that comes from unexpected success is deeper and more lasting than the respect that comes from announced success. When people know you've been working towards something, they might admire your persistence or effort. But when they discover you've achieved something significant without their knowledge, they respect your capability and character. They realize that you're someone who gets things done. regardless of who's watching or supporting you. Unexpected success also positions you as someone who executes rather than someone who announces. In a world full of people who are constantly talking about their plans and sharing their struggles, being someone who delivers results without commentary makes you stand out. You develop a reputation for substance over style, for action over explanation, for results over rhetoric. This reputation becomes a competitive advantage in both personal and professional contexts. The psychological impact of achieving something significant in private is also profound for your own development. When you succeed without external support or recognition, you prove to yourself that you're capable of creating results independently. You don't need perfect conditions, supportive environments, or encouraging people to achieve your goals. This self-reliance becomes a foundation for taking on bigger challenges and pursuing more ambitious goals in the future. Unexpected success also allows you to enjoy your achievements without the pressure of living up to external expectations. When you've announced your goals and then achieved them, there's often an immediate pressure to set new bigger goals to maintain momentum in other people's minds. But when you succeed quietly, you can savor your achievement privately, decide thoughtfully about your next moves, and set new goals based on your own desires rather than other people's expectations. The cumulative effect of multiple unexpected successes is the development of a personal brand built on reliability rather than publicity. People begin to see you as someone who consistently delivers without fanfare. They stop questioning your ability to follow through and start assuming you'll figure out how to achieve whatever you set your mind to. This assumption becomes self-fulfilling because people start bringing opportunities to you rather than you having to chase them. Ultimately, success that no one saw coming carries a weight and respect that announced success rarely achieves. It demonstrates character, competence, and commitment in ways that public journeys cannot. It protects you from the downsides of visibility while providing all the benefits of achievement. And it positions you as someone who's focused on substance rather than appearance, on results rather than recognition, on being rather than seeming. Chapter 8. The people who need to know will know when it matters. There's a crucial distinction between keeping your goals completely secret and sharing them strategically with the right people at the right time. The principle isn't about becoming a hermit or never discussing your ambitions with anyone. It's about being intentional about who gets access to your plans and when they get that access. The people who truly need to know about your goals will become apparent as you make progress, and they'll know when their knowledge actually serves your success rather than satisfying their curiosity. Timing is everything when it comes to sharing your goals. Telling someone about your intention to start a business on day one serves no practical purpose and creates unnecessary pressure and expectation. But telling a potential investor about your business after you've built something worth investing in serves a clear strategic purpose. The difference is that in the second scenario, you're sharing information that leads to action rather than attention. The people who need to know about your goals fall into specific categories. Those who can directly help you achieve them, those whose cooperation you need for success, and those who will be significantly affected by your success. Everyone else is just an audience, and audiences aren't necessary for achievement. They might be entertaining or hosting, but they don't contribute to results. Distinguishing between helpful confidants and unnecessary audiences is crucial for maintaining focus and energy. Strategic disclosure also means sharing information on a need-to-know basis rather than a want-to-know basis. Many people want to know what you're working on because they're curious, bored, or looking for conversation material. But wanting to know isn't the same as needing to know. You don't owe people access to your plans just because they're interested. Your goals aren't entertainment or social currency to be shared for the sake of relationship maintenance. The right people often reveal themselves through your progress rather than your announcements. As you work toward your goal, you'll encounter obstacles that require specific expertise, resources, or connections. The people who can provide what you need will become obvious based on what you're actually doing rather than what you're planning to do. This natural revelation process ensures that you're connecting with people who can contribute to your success rather than just witness your ambition. Professional contexts often require strategic disclosure of goals and plans. If you're working within an organization or industry, certain people need to know about your ambitions for practical reasons. But even in these contexts, there's a difference between sharing necessary information with relevant stakeholders and broadcasting your plans to anyone who will listen. The key is maintaining focus on function rather than attention. Strategic sharing also means being selective about the details you reveal, even to people who need to know. You might tell your business partner that you're working on expanding into a new market without sharing every detail of your strategy, timeline, or concerns. You provide the information they need to support your efforts without overwhelming them with information that doesn't serve a practical purpose. The people who need to know will also demonstrate their worthiness through their response to your initial sharing. Someone who immediately starts offering unsolicited advice, sharing their own related experiences, or expressing doubt about your approach probably doesn't need to know more details. Someone who asks thoughtful questions, offers specific help, or simply acknowledges your sharing without making it about themselves, is more likely to be a valuable confidant. Real supporters often prefer to be told about your goals when they can actually be helpful rather than when you first conceive them. Being told about someone's early-stage plans can feel like being asked to provide emotional labor without being able to contribute anything practical. But being brought into a goal when your skills, resources, or connections are needed feels like genuine partnership rather than social obligation. Strategic disclosure also protects your relationships from the strain that can come from premature goal sharing. When you tell someone about a goal too early in the process, you're essentially asking them to invest emotional energy in something that might not materialize. If the goal changes or doesn't work out, they might feel like their support was wasted. But when you share goals strategically, people can invest in concrete progress rather than abstract possibilities. The principle of need to know also applies to family members and close friends, though it requires more nuance. These relationships involve emotional dimensions that professional relationships don't. However, the same basic principle applies. Sharing should serve a purpose beyond social connection. If telling your family about your goal will help them understand why you're making certain choices or need certain support, then sharing serves a function. If it's just to keep them informed, it might be unnecessary. Strategic disclosure becomes especially important when you're working on goals that might be controversial, unusual, or difficult for others to understand. Not everyone needs to be brought along on your journey of convincing them that your goal is worthwhile. It's often more effective to demonstrate your commitment and capability through progress than to try to build support through explanation. The people who need to know will also respect your decision to work privately. They'll understand that focused execution often requires protection from outside input and distraction. They won't pressure you for updates or details beyond what you're comfortable sharing. Their support will be practical rather than social, based on what you need rather than what they want to know. Ultimately, the need-to-know principle helps you maintain the benefits of privacy while still building the strategic relationships necessary for significant achievement. It ensures that your energy goes toward progress rather than explanation, toward building rather than broadcasting, toward achieving rather than announcing. The people who matter most will know what they need to know when it serves your success. And that timing makes all the difference in maintaining momentum while building support. Chapter 9. Build momentum without broadcasting every step. Momentum is one of the most powerful forces in goal achievement, but it's also one of the most fragile. Real momentum comes from the compound effect of consistent action over time, not from the temporary energy boost of social recognition. When you broadcast every step of your journey, you're actually undermining the natural momentum building process by diverting energy from action to communication, from progress to performance, from building to broadcasting. True momentum is built in the quiet spaces between social updates. It's created through the daily repetition of small actions that gradually build into significant progress. This process is often unglamorous, repetitive, and not particularly interesting to outside observers. The magic happens in the consistency, not in the individual actions. When you focus on documenting and sharing this process, you're shifting attention away from the work itself and onto the performance of doing the work. The compound effect that creates real momentum requires time and consistency to manifest. In the early stages of any significant goal, progress is often invisible or minimal. This is exactly when most people start broadcasting their efforts because they need external validation to keep going. But this is also when you most need to protect your energy and focus from external distractions. The early momentum is fragile and needs to be nurtured internally before it can withstand external pressure and opinion. Broadcasting every step also creates artificial pressure to maintain a certain pace or trajectory. When people are watching your progress, you feel obligated to show consistent forward movement even when the natural rhythm of your goal includes periods of apparent stagnation or even temporary setbacks. This pressure can lead to rushed decisions, unsustainable pace, or abandonment of the goal. When reality doesn't match the narrative you've created publicly. Real momentum is also built through learning and adaptation, which often requires experimenting with approaches that don't work. When you're broadcasting your journey, failed experiments feel like public failures rather than private learning experiences. This makes you less likely to take the risks and try the approaches that are necessary for finding what actually works. You become more concerned with maintaining a consistent public image than with finding effective strategies. The energy required to maintain momentum is finite, and broadcasting depletes this energy in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Every social media update, every conversation about your progress, every response to questions about your journey takes mental and emotional resources that could be directed toward the actual work. This energy leak might seem small on a daily basis, but over weeks and months, it significantly impacts your ability to maintain forward progress. Momentum also requires the ability to pivot and adjust strategies without external interference. When you're broadcasting every step, changes in approach feel like public admissions of failure rather than intelligent adaptations. This makes you more likely to stick with strategies that aren't working simply to maintain consistency in your public narrative. The result is often persistence in ineffective approaches rather than the flexibility that real progress requires. Private momentum building also allows you to develop internal motivational systems that don't depend on external feedback. When your sense of progress comes from your own measurement and observation rather than from others' reactions to your updates, you become more attuned to what's actually working versus what looks good from the outside. This internal feedback loop becomes crucial for maintaining motivation during the inevitable periods when external progress isn't visible. The momentum that comes from private work is also more sustainable because it's based on intrinsic satisfaction rather than external validation. Each small win builds genuine confidence rather than social confidence. Each completed task creates real energy rather than performed energy. This kind of momentum doesn't crash when external attention fades because it was never dependent on that attention in the first place. Building momentum without broadcasting also protects you from the comparison trap that social sharing often creates. When you're posting about your progress, you inevitably start comparing your journey to others who are sharing similar content. This comparison can be motivating initially, but it often becomes demoralizing when you realize that everyone's journey is different and that social media presentations rarely reflect the full reality of someone's experience. Private momentum building also allows you to celebrate victories in proportion to their actual significance rather than their social media potential. Small meaningful progress gets the recognition it deserves internally while major breakthroughs don't get diminished by having to be packaged for public consumption. This appropriate calibration of celebration helps maintain motivation across the entire journey rather than just at the most shareable moments. The focus required for building real momentum is incompatible with the scattered attention that comes from constantly considering how to present your work to others. When you're thinking about angles for updates, responses to comments, and ways to make your progress interesting to followers, you're not fully present with the work itself. This divided attention slows progress and reduces the quality of your efforts. Momentum without broadcasting also builds a different kind of confidence. Instead of confidence based on other people's reactions to your efforts, you develop confidence based on your ability to create progress independently. This self-generated confidence is more stable and reliable because it doesn't fluctuate based on external factors. It becomes a foundation that supports bigger goals and greater challenges in the future. The ultimate goal is to reach a point where your momentum is so strong and consistent that external factors can't derail it. This happens when you've built systems, habits, and internal motivations that sustain progress regardless of whether anyone is watching, supporting, or even aware of what you're doing. This kind of momentum makes you unstoppable because it doesn't depend on anything outside your control. Chapter 10. Success doesn't need a narrator. The most powerful success stories are often the ones that never get told, at least not while they're happening. Success in its purest form is about achieving something meaningful, not about having that achievement witnessed, documented, or narrated by others. When you feel the need to provide constant commentary on your journey, you're often revealing more about your insecurity than your progress. Real success is confident enough to exist without explanation, strong enough to stand without support, and valuable enough to matter without marketing. The need for a narrator usually comes from uncertainty about whether what you're doing actually matters. When you're confident in the value and direction of your work, you don't feel compelled to justify it to others or seek validation for your choices. The work speaks for itself through its results, not through your explanations of why it's important. This quiet confidence is one of the hallmarks of people who achieve significant success without fanfare. Narrating your success also changes your relationship with the process in ways that can be counterproductive. Instead of being fully present with the work, you're partially focused on how to describe the work to others. Instead of experiencing your progress directly, you're thinking about how to frame your progress for an audience. This meta layer of consciousness can distance you from the immediate feedback and satisfaction that comes from the work itself. The most successful people throughout history were often terrible at narrating their own success while it was happening. They were too busy doing the work to spend much time talking about doing the work. Their documentation when it existed was for practical purposes like tracking progress or solving problems. Not for social purposes like maintaining engagement or building a personal brand. The narrative came later, if at all, constructed by others who recognized the significance of what had been achieved. Success without narration also preserves the purity of your motivation. When you're not thinking about how to present your work to others, you can focus entirely on what's most effective, rather than what's most impressive. You can choose strategies based on results rather than optics. You can make decisions based on your values rather than your image. This clarity of purpose often leads to better outcomes because your energy isn't divided between achieving and appearing to achieve. The pressure to narrate also creates artificial milestones and celebrations that can disrupt natural momentum. Instead of celebrating when you reach meaningful internal benchmarks, you start celebrating when you reach moments that are easy to share with others. This external calibration of success can lead you away from what actually matters toward what's most presentable, potentially undermining the very success you're trying to document. Narration also requires you to crystallize and communicate ideas that might be better left fluid and evolving. When you're constantly explaining your approach to others, you can become overly attached to specific methods or timelines simply because you've articulated them publicly. This can make you less adaptive and responsive to new information or changing circumstances that would normally cause you to adjust your approach. The energy required for effective narration is substantial and often underestimated. Telling your story well requires creativity, emotional labor, and strategic thinking. You have to consider your audience, craft compelling content, and manage responses and reactions. All of this takes mental bandwidth that could be directed toward the actual work. The most successful people are often those who recognize this trade-off and choose to invest their energy in execution rather than explanation. Success without narration also protects you from the premature sense of completion that can come from telling your story before it's finished. When you share your journey with others, their responses can give you a sense of closure or accomplishment that's premature. You might feel like you've done something when you've really just talked about doing something. This false sense of progress can reduce your motivation to continue the actual work. The absence of narration also allows success to maintain its mystery and power. When people discover your achievements without having followed your journey, they're often more impressed because they can't diminish your success by pointing to the help you received, the struggles you shared, or the doubts you expressed along the way. Your success appears complete and confident rather than documented and explained. Private success also develops different qualities than public success. When you're not performing your journey for others, you can be more honest about your struggles, more experimental with your approaches, and more authentic about your motivations. This honesty often leads to better strategies and more sustainable progress because you're not constrained by the need to maintain a consistent public image. The most profound successes often happen in areas where narration would actually diminish the achievement. Personal growth, relationship building, character development, and spiritual progress are all areas where constant commentary can interfere with the process itself. Some things are meant to be experienced rather than explained, lived rather than documented, felt rather than shared. Ultimately, success doesn't need a narrator because it creates its own evidence. Results speak louder than stories. Impact matters more than imagery. Achievement carries more weight than announcement. When you focus on creating value rather than creating content about creating value, you often find that the success you build is more substantial, more satisfying, and more sustainable than anything you could have achieved while trying to document the process. Chapter 11. The psychology of premature satisfaction destroys real achievement. There's a devastating psychological trap that catches most people who share their goals publicly, and it's rooted in how the human brain processes reward and satisfaction. When you announce a goal and receive positive feedback, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that would be released when you actually achieve the goal. This creates what psychologists call premature satisfaction, where your mind essentially tricks itself into believing that talking about the goal is equivalent to achieving it. This isn't just a minor psychological quirk. It's a fundamental flaw in how most people approach their ambitions that consistently undermines their ability to follow through. The dopamine system in your brain evolved to reward behaviors that aided survival and reproduction. In the ancestral environment, planning and communicating about plans were often as important as executing them because survival depended on social coordination and group cooperation. But in the modern world, this same system can work against individual achievement because the social reward for announcing plans can satisfy your brain's reward system without requiring the difficult work of execution. When you share a goal and people respond with encouragement, congratulations, or expressions of confidence in your ability, your brain interprets these social signals as evidence that you've already succeeded in some meaningful way. The reward circuitry that should motivate you toward the actual goal gets partially satisfied by the social reward of sharing the goal. This satisfaction then reduces your internal drive to pursue the actual achievement because your brain has already received some of the reward it was seeking. This premature satisfaction is particularly dangerous because it feels so positive and motivating in the moment. The encouragement you receive when sharing goals often makes you feel more confident and committed than you did before sharing. You walk away from these conversations feeling energized and supported, but this feeling is borrowed from your future success. You're experiencing the emotional payoff of achievement before you've done the work to earn it. And once you've spent that emotional currency, it's no longer available to fuel the actual effort required. The problem becomes even more complex when you consider that the human brain is terrible at distinguishing between different types of progress. When you receive social validation for sharing a goal, your brain doesn't clearly differentiate between that validation and the validation that would come from achieving the goal. From a neurochemical perspective, talking about losing weight and actually losing weight can trigger similar reward responses. This means that the more you talk about your goals, the less motivated you become to actually achieve them. Premature satisfaction also manifests in the way people respond to goal-related content on social media. The likes, comments, and shares that people receive for posting about their intentions provide immediate gratification that can substitute for the delayed gratification that comes from actual achievement. This creates a feedback loop where people become addicted to sharing their intentions rather than pursuing their goals. They start optimizing for social engagement around their goals rather than progress toward their goals. The psychology becomes even more destructive when you consider how premature satisfaction affects your relationship with difficulty and setbacks. When you've already received positive feedback for your intentions, encountering obstacles in the actual pursuit can feel like a betrayal of the narrative you've created. The people who encouraged you expected success, and now you're facing challenges that make success uncertain. This creates psychological pressure to either quit to avoid disappointing your supporters or to minimize the difficulty to maintain the positive narrative. Premature satisfaction also changes how you process the natural discomfort that comes with meaningful goals. All significant achievements require periods of discomfort, uncertainty, and struggle. These periods are part of the process, not signs that something is wrong. But when you've already received emotional rewards for sharing your goal, the discomfort of actually pursuing it feels particularly harsh by comparison. You've tasted the easy reward of social validation, which makes the difficult reward of actual achievement seem less appealing. The neuroscience research on this phenomenon is clear and concerning. Studies have shown that people who share their goals publicly are significantly less likely to achieve them. And brain imaging reveals why. The same neural pathways that light up when people make progress toward their goals also activate when they share those goals with others. This means that sharing goals literally tricks your brain into thinking you've made progress when you haven't. Your motivation system gets confused about where you actually stand in relation to your objectives. This psychological trap is particularly insidious because it affects high achievers as much as anyone else. Intelligence, talent, and past success don't protect you from premature satisfaction. In fact, successful people might be more susceptible because they're used to their announcements being taken seriously and receiving positive responses. When someone with a track record of achievement shares a new goal, people are especially likely to respond with confidence and encouragement, creating an even stronger premature satisfaction effect. The problem extends beyond individual psychology to affect the quality of the goals themselves. When you know you're going to share a goal publicly, you often unconsciously modify it to be more impressive, more socially acceptable, or more aligned with what you think others want to hear. This means you're not just getting premature satisfaction for your real goals. You're getting it for goals that aren't even authentically yours. You're borrowing satisfaction for pursuits that don't truly reflect your values or desires. Breaking free from premature satisfaction requires understanding that the discomfort of not sharing your goals is actually productive discomfort. When you feel the urge to tell someone about your plans and you resist that urge, you're redirecting that social energy back into execution energy. The tension you feel from keeping your goals private creates internal pressure that can only be relieved through action. This is the kind of pressure that creates results rather than just conversations. The alternative to premature satisfaction is what could be called earned satisfaction, where you only allow yourself to feel good about your goals when you've actually made measurable progress toward them. This means celebrating private victories, acknowledging internal growth, and building satisfaction from the work itself rather than from other people's reactions to your work. This kind of satisfaction is more sustainable and more motivating because it's directly connected to actual achievement. Understanding premature satisfaction also helps explain why so many people struggle with consistency in their goal pursuit. They start strong, often immediately after sharing their goal, when the social validation is fresh and motivating, but as that social reward fades and the real work begins, their motivation crashes. They've already received some of the psychological payoff they were seeking. So, the actual work feels less urgent and less rewarding. This cycle repeats every time they renounce their goals, creating a pattern of false starts and abandoned efforts. The most successful people instinctively understand this psychological dynamic, even if they can't articulate it scientifically. They know that talking about their goals feels good in a way that can undermine their drive to achieve them. They recognize that the energy used to communicate about goals is energy that's no longer available for pursuing goals. And they understand that the satisfaction of achievement is diluted when it's shared prematurely. This understanding leads them to protect their goals from premature exposure, allowing the full psychological reward to be earned through actual accomplishment rather than social performance. Chapter 12. How Silence Builds Unshakable Internal Motivation. True motivation, the kind that sustains you through months and years of effort, can't be borrowed from other people. It has to be built from within, and it has to be maintained independently of external circumstances. When you work in silence, you're forced to develop this internal motivation system because you don't have access to the external motivation that comes from sharing your progress with others. This isn't a limitation, it's an advantage. Internal motivation is more reliable, more sustainable, and more powerful than external motivation because it doesn't depend on other people's attention, energy, or continued interest in your goals. Silence creates internal motivation through what psychologists call intrinsic reward processing. When you're not receiving external validation for your efforts, your brain has to find satisfaction in the work itself, in the progress you're making, and in the identity you're building. This forces you to develop a more sophisticated and nuanced relationship with motivation that goes beyond the simple pleasure-pain calculations that drive most people's behavior. You learn to find satisfaction in effort itself, not just in the recognition of effort. Working in silence also eliminates the motivation crashes that come from fluctuating external support. When your motivation depends on other people's reactions, it rises and falls with their attention levels, their moods, and their own life circumstances. People who were initially supportive might become distracted, skeptical, or even jealous as your progress continues. If your motivation is tied to their support, these changes in their attitude directly impact your ability to continue. But when your motivation is internal, these external fluctuations become irrelevant to your progress. Internal motivation is also more sophisticated than external motivation because it's based on multiple sources rather than a single source. When you work silently, you learn to draw motivation from your growing competence, your increasing self-respect, your expanding sense of what's possible, and your deepening understanding of why your goal matters to you. This diversified motivation portfolio is much more stable than motivation that depends solely on other people's reactions or approval. Silence forces you to confront and resolve the internal obstacles that external motivation often masks. When people are cheering you on, it's easy to ignore the self-doubt, fear, and resistance that naturally arise during challenging pursuits. But when you're working alone, these internal barriers become impossible to ignore. This initially makes the work harder, but ultimately makes you stronger because you develop the skills to overcome internal resistance rather than just avoiding it through external distraction. The process of building internal motivation through silence also develops what could be called motivational self-reliance. You learn that you don't need perfect conditions, supportive people, or ideal circumstances to maintain your drive. You can generate enthusiasm independently, sustain effort through difficult periods, and maintain commitment even when external factors are discouraging. This self-reliance becomes a competitive advantage because most people can only perform well when external conditions are favorable. Silent work also allows you to discover your authentic motivational triggers rather than adopting other people's motivational frameworks. When you're constantly discussing your goals with others, you tend to absorb their perspectives on what should motivate you, why your goal matters, and how you should think about the work. But when you work in silence, you're forced to develop your own understanding of what drives you. This self-knowledge becomes invaluable for maintaining motivation over long periods and for setting future goals that truly align with your values. Internal motivation built through silence is also more resistant to setbacks and obstacles. When your motivation comes from within, temporary failures don't feel like fundamental judgments on your worth or capability. They feel like information that you can use to adjust your approach. But when your motivation is external, setbacks can feel like public embarrassments that threaten your identity and social standing. This difference in how setbacks are processed has a huge impact on your ability to persist through the inevitable challenges that accompany meaningful goals. The silence also protects your motivation from what psychologists call motivational contamination. When you share your goals with others, their own fears, doubts, and limitations can unconsciously influence your motivation. If someone important to you expresses skepticism about your goal, that skepticism can become internalized and weaken your drive. But when you work silently, your motivation remains uncontaminated by others' psychological baggage. You can maintain pure focus on your own reasons for pursuing your goal. Building internal motivation through silence also develops emotional regulation skills that serve you far beyond any individual goal. You learn to manage your own emotional states, generate your own enthusiasm, and maintain your own commitment without relying on external emotional support. These skills make you more resilient in all areas of life because you're not dependent on other people's moods or availability to maintain your own emotional equilibrium. The process also teaches you to recognize the difference between authentic motivation and borrowed motivation. Authentic motivation feels steady, sustainable, and connected to your core values. Borrowed motivation feels intense but unstable, and it often comes with anxiety about maintaining external approval. When you've experienced both types, you develop a preference for authentic motivation because it's more comfortable and more reliable over time. Silent work also allows your motivation to evolve naturally as you make progress. When you're not locked into external narratives about why you're pursuing your goal, you can discover new sources of motivation as they emerge. You might start a fitness goal for appearance reasons, but discover that you're more motivated by the mental clarity that comes from exercise. This evolution of motivation is natural and healthy, but it's harder to navigate when you've committed to specific motivational narratives in public. Internal motivation built through silence also tends to be more sustainable because it's not dependent on novelty or intensity. External motivation often requires escalating levels of excitement, support, or recognition to maintain its effectiveness. But internal motivation can be sustained through quiet satisfaction, steady progress, and gradual improvement. This makes it much more suitable for long-term goals that require consistent effort over extended periods. The confidence that comes from internal motivation is also qualitatively different from the confidence that comes from external validation. External validation creates confidence that's dependent on continued approval from others. But internal motivation creates confidence that's based on your proven ability to sustain effort independently. This self-generated confidence is more stable because it's not vulnerable to changes in other people's opinions or availability. Understanding how to build and maintain internal motivation through silence also makes you more attractive to others both personally and professionally. People are drawn to individuals who seem to have their own internal compass, who don't need constant reassurance or validation, and who can maintain their drive regardless of external circumstances. This attractive quality emerges naturally from the practice of working silently and building internal motivation systems. The ultimate goal of building internal motivation through silence is to reach a point where your drive comes from the intrinsic satisfaction of growth, contribution, and self-expression rather than from external rewards or recognition. When you reach this point, your motivation becomes virtually unshakable because it's not dependent on anything outside your control. You become someone who can pursue meaningful goals regardless of who supports you, who believes in you, or who even knows what you're doing. This independence is one of the most valuable capabilities you can develop, and it emerges naturally from the discipline of working in silence. Chapter 13. Social media has weaponized your need for validation against your success. Social media platforms are designed to exploit your natural human need for validation and connection, but they do so in ways that systematically undermine your ability to achieve meaningful goals. The same psychological mechanisms that these platforms use to capture your attention and generate engagement are the mechanisms that destroy your motivation for real-world achievement. Every time you post about your goals, react to others' goal-related content, or consume motivational content online, you're feeding a system that profits from keeping you in a cycle of aspiration without achievement. The fundamental business model of social media platforms depends on keeping you engaged with their content rather than engaged with your actual life. They make money when you're scrolling, posting, commenting, and consuming, not when you're working toward your goals in the real world. This creates a conflict of interest where the platform's success depends on your distraction from the very things that would make you most fulfilled and successful. The more time you spend documenting your life online, the less time you have to actually live it. The validation system built into social media platforms is specifically designed to be addictive. The variable ratio reinforcement schedule used by likes, comments, and shares creates the same psychological dependency that makes gambling addictive. You never know when you'll get a positive response to your posts, so you keep posting and checking for responses. This creates a dopamine-driven cycle that hijacks your brain's reward system and redirects it away from real-world achievements toward online validation seeking. When you post about your goals on social media, you're essentially asking thousands of people to become stakeholders in your personal development. Most of these people don't know you well, don't understand your circumstances, and don't have any real investment in your success. Yet, their reactions to your posts can significantly impact your motivation and confidence. You're giving virtual strangers the power to influence your emotional state and your commitment to your goals. This is a fundamentally unhealthy dynamic that puts your success at the mercy of people who have no reason to care about your long-term well-being. The performance aspect of social media also corrupts your relationship with your goals. When you know you're going to share your progress online, you start optimizing for what looks good in posts rather than what actually moves you forward. You might choose workouts that photograph well over workouts that are most effective for your fitness goals. You might work on projects that generate impressive updates rather than projects that create real value. The medium becomes the message and your actual goals become secondary to your social media presence. Social media also creates artificial urgency around sharing your progress. The platforms are designed to make you feel like if you don't post about something, it didn't really happen. This "pics or it didn't happen" mentality transforms private victories into content obligations. Instead of being able to enjoy your progress privately and at your own pace, you feel pressured to immediately convert every achievement into social media content. This constant performance pressure can make working toward goals feel like a job rather than a personal journey. The comparison culture fostered by social media is particularly toxic for goal achievement. When you're constantly exposed to other people's highlight reels, it becomes almost impossible to maintain perspective on your own progress. Someone will always appear to be moving faster, working harder, or achieving more impressive results. This comparison trap can lead to either giving up because you feel inadequate or pursuing goals that aren't aligned with your actual values just to keep up with others' apparent progress. The comment sections and social interactions around goal-related posts also expose you to a constant stream of unsolicited advice, skepticism, and judgment. Even well-meaning comments can plant seeds of doubt or pressure you to explain and defend your choices. The mental energy required to process and respond to this social input takes away from the mental energy available for actually working on your goals. You end up spending more time managing other people's reactions to your goals than actually pursuing them. Social media platforms also fragment your attention in ways that are particularly damaging to goal achievement. The constant stream of notifications, the habit of checking for updates, and the addictive pull of the scroll all train your brain to seek immediate gratification and instant stimulation. This makes it much harder to engage in the sustained focused effort that meaningful goals require. Your attention span gets shortened. Your tolerance for boredom decreases. And your ability to delay gratification weakens. The instant gratification available through social media also creates unrealistic expectations about how quickly you should see results from your goals. When you can get immediate feedback on a post, immediate responses to messages, and immediate access to entertainment, the slow, gradual progress that characterizes real achievement can feel frustratingly slow by comparison. This can lead to abandoning goals that are actually progressing normally because the pace doesn't match your social media conditioned expectations. The algorithmic nature of social media feeds also means that you're not getting a random sample of reality. When you consume goal-related content, the algorithms show you content that's designed to generate engagement, which often means content that's either extremely positive or extremely negative. You're not seeing the boring, consistent day-to-day reality of most people's goal pursuit. You're seeing either the highlight moments or the dramatic failure stories. This skewed sample creates unrealistic expectations about what the goal achievement process should look like. Social media also commodifies your personal growth and turns it into content. Your struggles become stories. Your breakthroughs become posts, and your journey becomes a brand. This transformation from person to content creator changes your relationship with your own experience. Instead of living your life fully, you start curating it for consumption. Instead of growing for your own benefit, you start growing for your audience's entertainment. This shift can hollow out the meaning and satisfaction that would normally come from personal achievement. The social proof mechanisms built into social media platforms also make you more susceptible to following trends and popular approaches rather than finding what actually works for you personally. When you see that certain types of goals, methods, or approaches are getting lots of engagement, you're psychologically primed to adopt them, even if they're not suited to your circumstances, preferences, or actual needs. You start pursuing goals that are popular rather than goals that are personally meaningful. Breaking free from social media's influence on your goals doesn't necessarily mean abandoning these platforms entirely, though that can be effective. It means recognizing how they're designed to exploit your psychology and making conscious choices about how and when to engage with them. It means keeping your most important goals completely private from social media, using these platforms for communication and entertainment rather than validation, and developing the discipline to work on your real goals without feeling the need to document the process online. The ultimate goal is to reclaim your natural motivation and achievement systems from the artificial systems created by social media platforms. This means rediscovering the satisfaction that comes from private progress, the motivation that comes from internal rather than external rewards, and the confidence that comes from actual achievement rather than social validation. When you can pursue your goals without needing to share them online, you've taken back control of your success from algorithms and attention merchants who profit from your distraction. Chapter 14. The discipline of privacy creates authentic achievement. Privacy isn't just about keeping secrets. It's about creating the psychological and practical conditions necessary for authentic achievement. When you pursue goals privately, you're forced to confront your real motivations, develop genuine discipline, and build success on a foundation of internal rather than external validation. This process creates a different kind of achievement, one that's more satisfying, more sustainable, and more aligned with who you actually are rather than who you think you should appear to be. Authentic achievement can only emerge when you're free from the pressure to perform your growth for others. When no one is watching, you can be completely honest about your struggles, your failures, and your real reasons for pursuing your goals. This honesty is essential for making the adjustments and corrections that lead to real progress. When you're performing your journey for an audience, you have to maintain a certain narrative consistency that can prevent you from acknowledging what's actually working and what isn't. The discipline required to work privately is also fundamentally different from the discipline required to work publicly. Public discipline is often motivated by shame, avoidance, social pressure, or the desire to maintain an image. Private discipline is motivated by authentic commitment to your goals and genuine belief in their value. This difference in motivation creates different outcomes. Public discipline tends to be inconsistent and unsustainable because it depends on external factors. Private discipline tends to be steady and reliable because it's based on internal conviction. Privacy also protects your goals from what could be called social pollution. When you share your goals with others, their opinions, fears, and limitations become mixed with your own motivations and strategies. Even well-meaning advice can cloud your judgment and lead you away from approaches that would work best for your specific situation. When you work privately, your goals remain pure expressions of your own values, desires, and judgment rather than compromises designed to accommodate others' perspectives. The process of private goal pursuit also develops self-awareness in ways that public pursuit cannot. When no one else is monitoring your progress, you become the sole observer of your own patterns, triggers, and tendencies. You learn what time of day you work best, what environments support your efforts, what internal states are most productive, and what obstacles consistently trip you up. This self-knowledge becomes invaluable for optimizing your approach and for setting future goals that are better aligned with your natural rhythms and preferences. Privacy also allows you to experiment with different approaches without fear of judgment or the need to explain your choices. You can try methods that might seem unconventional, abandon strategies that aren't working without admitting public failure, and iterate rapidly based on what you're learning about yourself and your goal. This experimental freedom often leads to discovering unique approaches that work specifically for you rather than following generic advice that may not fit your circumstances. The authenticity that emerges from private work also creates more meaningful success. When you achieve something through private effort, you know exactly what you contributed to that success. You can't attribute it to luck, external support, or favorable circumstances because you were the only witness to the process. This creates a deep sense of ownership and pride that can't be replicated through achievements that were heavily supported or documented by others. You know you earned it, and that knowledge becomes an unshakable foundation for confidence. Private achievement also tends to be more innovative because it's not constrained by social expectations about how goals should be pursued. When you're not explaining your methods to others, you don't have to justify unconventional approaches or defend strategies that might seem unusual from the outside. This freedom to work in ways that make sense to you personally often leads to creative solutions and breakthrough approaches that wouldn't emerge under the pressure of social scrutiny. The discipline of privacy also builds what could be called achievement integrity. This is the alignment between your stated values and your actual behavior, between your expressed goals and your daily actions, between your public persona and your private reality. When you work privately, you can't maintain a gap between how you appear to others and how you actually live. This alignment creates inner peace and authenticity that makes success more satisfying and sustainable. Privacy also protects your motivation from the energy drain that comes from managing other people's expectations and reactions. When you don't have to provide updates, answer questions, or address concerns from others, all of your energy can go toward the actual work. This conservation of energy often leads to faster progress and better results because you're not dividing your attention between doing the work and communicating about the work. The solitude that comes with private goal pursuit also creates space for the kind of deep thinking and reflection that leads to breakthrough insights. When you're not constantly processing other people's input about your goals, your mind is free to make its own connections, draw its own conclusions, and develop its own understanding of what you're trying to achieve and why. This mental space is essential for the kind of creative problem solving that characterizes exceptional achievement. Private work also builds resilience in unique ways. When you encounter obstacles and setbacks without external support or sympathy, you're forced to develop internal resources for dealing with difficulty. You learn to comfort yourself, motivate yourself, and problem solve independently. These skills become valuable assets that serve you well beyond any individual goal. You become someone who can handle challenges without needing external emotional support or validation. The patience required for private goal pursuit also creates better long-term results. When you're not under pressure to show quick progress to others, you can take the time necessary to build solid foundations, develop proper techniques, and create sustainable systems. This patience often leads to more impressive ultimate achievements because the work is built on stronger foundations rather than rushed to meet external expectations. Privacy also allows for the kind of deep transformational work that changes not just what you achieve but who you become in the process. When you're not performing your growth for others, you can engage in the sometimes uncomfortable process of examining your beliefs, challenging your assumptions, and evolving your identity. This internal transformation is often the most valuable part of goal achievement, but it's difficult to access when you're focused on maintaining a consistent external image. The discipline of privacy ultimately creates a different relationship with success itself. Instead of seeing achievement as something that needs to be witnessed and validated by others, you learn to value the intrinsic satisfaction that comes from growth, competence, and contribution. This shift in perspective makes you less dependent on external recognition and more focused on creating real value. You become someone who achieves not for applause but for the authentic satisfaction that comes from becoming your best self and contributing something meaningful to the world. Chapter 15. Master the art of building in silence and emerging with results. The ultimate mastery in goal achievement is the ability to work consistently and effectively without external accountability, support or recognition, and then emerge with completed results that speak for themselves. This is the art of building in silence, and it represents the highest level of personal discipline and self-reliance. When you can create significant achievements without external pressure or validation, you've developed a capability that makes you virtually unstoppable in any area of life you choose to focus on. Building in silence requires a fundamental shift in how you think about the relationship between effort and recognition. Most people operate under the assumption that effort should be witnessed, progress should be shared, and achievements should be celebrated publicly. But when you master the art of silent building, you learn to find satisfaction in the work itself rather than in others' awareness of the work. This internal satisfaction is more reliable and sustainable than external recognition because it doesn't depend on factors outside your control. The process of silent building also develops what could be called execution confidence. This is the deep certainty that comes from knowing you can create results independently without external pressure, support, or supervision. This confidence is different from performance confidence, which depends on others' reactions and approval. Execution confidence is self-generated and self-maintained, making it much more valuable for long-term success because it doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances. Mastering silent building also requires developing sophisticated internal feedback systems that replace the external feedback most people rely on. You learn to accurately assess your own progress, identify your own mistakes, and adjust your own approach without needing input from others. This self-monitoring capability becomes invaluable because it allows you to make corrections in real time rather than waiting for external feedback that might come too late or be too influenced by others' agendas. The discipline required for building in silence also creates what could be called motivational independence. You learn to generate your own enthusiasm, maintain your own momentum, and sustain your own commitment without borrowing energy from others. This independence is particularly valuable in leadership contexts because it allows you to provide energy and direction to others rather than needing them to provide it to you. You become a source rather than a drain. Silent building also protects your work from the premature optimization that often occurs when you're working publicly. When others are watching your process, you often feel pressure to make your approach look good or make sense to them, even when it's not fully developed. This can lead to explaining or defending methods before they're proven, which can cause you to become overly attached to approaches that might not be optimal. Working silently allows your methods to evolve naturally based on results rather than on the need to maintain consistency in public narratives. The emergence phase of silent building is just as important as the building phase. When you've completed significant work privately and then present the results, you have complete control over the narrative. You can emphasize what you want to emphasize. Minimize what you prefer to keep private and present your achievement in the most effective way possible. This control over the reveal allows you to maximize the impact of your work and avoid the dilution that often occurs when achievements are documented throughout the process. Emerging with results also creates a different kind of credibility than emerging with intentions or progress updates. When you present completed work, people have to take you seriously in a way they don't when you present plans or partial progress. Completed achievements can't be dismissed as easily as announced intentions. They represent proof of capability rather than expressions of hope. This shift in how others perceive you can open doors and create opportunities that wouldn't be available to someone known primarily for their aspirations. The timing of emergence is also crucial to master. Emerging too early before your results are truly impressive or complete dilutes the impact. Emerging too late after the moment when your results would be most relevant or valuable reduces their significance. Learning to recognize the optimal timing for revealing your work is a skill that develops through experience and careful attention to both your own progress and external circumstances. Mastering silent building also requires developing comfort with being misunderstood or underestimated while you're working. People might assume you're not ambitious, not working hard, or not capable of significant achievement because they can't see what you're doing. This misperception can be uncomfortable, but it's also protective. When people underestimate you, they're less likely to interfere with your work or create obstacles to your progress. Being underestimated can actually be a competitive advantage if you can handle the temporary discomfort it creates. The art of silent building also involves learning to manage your own psychology without external support. You have to develop skills for dealing with doubt, maintaining motivation during slow periods and celebrating small victories privately. These psychological management skills are valuable far beyond any individual goal because they make you more resilient and self-sufficient in all areas of life. You become someone who doesn't need ideal conditions or perfect support to perform at your best. Silent building also creates space for the kind of deep focused work that produces exceptional results. When you're not dividing your attention between doing the work and communicating about the work, you can enter flow states more easily and sustain them longer. This deeper engagement with your work often leads to insights, innovations, and breakthroughs that wouldn't emerge in a more scattered, socially engaged approach to goal pursuit. The reputation that comes from consistently building in silence and emerging with results is also qualitatively different from the reputation that comes from public process sharing. You become known as someone who delivers rather than someone who tries, someone who executes rather than someone who explains, someone who produces rather than someone who performs. This reputation attracts opportunities, resources, and collaborators that are drawn to competence rather than charisma. Mastering the art of silent building also prepares you for bigger challenges and more ambitious goals. When you know you can create significant results independently, you're more willing to take on projects that others might consider too risky or too difficult. You're not limited by what others think is possible for you because you've proven to yourself that you can achieve things that others didn't even know you were working on. This self-knowledge becomes a foundation for pursuing increasingly ambitious goals throughout your life. The ultimate mastery of silent building is reaching a point where you no longer feel any need to share your goals or seek validation for your efforts. The work itself becomes so satisfying, the progress so intrinsically rewarding, and the results so personally meaningful that external recognition becomes irrelevant. You reach a state where you're building and achieving for the pure satisfaction of growth and contribution rather than for any social or psychological reward. This state of pure motivation is rare and powerful, and it represents the highest level of personal development and goal achievement mastery. When you can consistently build in silence and emerge with results, you've developed one of the most valuable capabilities possible. The ability to create whatever you want in life regardless of external circumstances. You're no longer limited by who supports you, who believes in you, or who understands what you're trying to achieve. You become truly self-directed and self-sufficient, capable of pursuing any goal that aligns with your values and vision. This freedom is the ultimate reward of mastering the discipline of privacy and the art of silent execution.